Glory, glory, hallelujah.
We're located at a site called New Philadelphia. New Philadelphia was founded by Frank McWorter in 1836. The town no longer exists today. If you look behind me, there's lots of prairie grass behind me. And we're here with the National Science Foundation grant to rediscover New Philadelphia.
I'm gonna meet my
New Philadelphia is just remarkably significant in that it was founded by Free Frank McWorter, who had purchased himself out of slavery, came here, planned this town in advance, legally founded it, and then it grew as a multiracial town in a region that was filled with racial strife. His mother was West African. His father was likely George McWorter, a Scots-Irish planter, who was also his owner. And he's born in 1777 in South Carolina. In his 20s and 30s, moves with George McWorter to Kentucky, where George McWorter was setting up a new plantation in that area.
He was the son of his owner and actually had a managerial role on the farm in Kentucky and was able to hire himself out to mine saltpeter and then eventually to become a landowner himself.
He sees the developing Illinois frontier and the availability of land. He has purchased the freedom for his wife, his own freedom. He has a few grown children. And in about the 1820s, he begins to focus on purchasing land here in Illinois and now moving his family to Illinois.
What he wanted to do was to create a town, and he divided it up into 144 lots, and he began to sell lots in this town. And from the proceeds of selling that land, he was able to purchase members of his family out of slavery.
You know, it's just incredible. A man who spent 40 years working and very, very hard and saving every penny, being very frugal, being very clever.
In his lifetime, he purchases the freedom of 16 members of his entire family out of bondage. For a cash outlay in the currency of that day, it was about $14,000 in 19th century funds. If you calculate that for today, he was able to accumulate and expend over $300,000 to purchase 16 members of his family. So it's both a story of incredible freedom and his ability to overcome the adversity of slavery, but then also just a brilliant man. He saw the opportunities of starting a mining operation at one point that helped in that process. He saw the opportunity of moving to Illinois and new land and settlement and coming here in Pike County, Illinois, where he had moved.
New Philadelphia grew slowly. In 1855, there were about 58 people here. In 1865, there were about 160 people here.
Its population peaks in the census records in 1865 with about 160 residents, 30 households, several merchants. There was a cabinet maker, 2 shoemakers, blacksmiths, a wainwright, a wheelwright. There was a Baptist preacher in town.
What's interesting about New Philadelphia to me is that during the course of its history, it was a biracial town. That maybe 30 to 35% of the people were classified as African Americans and the rest were classified as white during the town's history. And so while there was a hierarchy based on race out here, there tended to be more cooperation and barn building and helping each other out. People had to survive, and they had to work with each other to survive, and that's one of the reasons why I think there was less tension here than other places.
We've never found a record of any major turmoil or problems, and the blacks and whites lived here together peacefully before the Civil War, 20 miles from Missouri, which was a slave state. They helped they lived together, they worshiped together, they intermarried. So I think it's something we can all learn a lesson from.
To call it New Philadelphia, we've always assumed that it was the new city of brotherly love. I mean, that's what the family tradition is, that it was a conscious decision to say that we want to rebuild America anew, right up next to slavery. And white people came and lived here. So apparently, for some time, it worked.
And I suspect the European Americans who moved here were of like mind. I think the story and the intent of the founder and also of the residents here would have been known by word of mouth. so that you probably had a town of individuals who were comfortable with that notion of a multiracial community. They probably realized the risks of it, and they knew the tensions going on surrounding them. This was an area completely rife with racial strife. Elijah Lovejoy is shot dead 50 miles south of here in the 1830s. He's an abolitionist and has his own printing press, and he's shot dead as a mob is burning down his house in the printing press. A town called Griggsville is just only about 10 miles from New Philadelphia. There's race riots there in the 1830s, 1840s. So this is by no means a frontier area free of racial strife, and yet he's able to accomplish all these remarkable features of creating an integrated town that is good purposefully and explicitly to obtain funds to buy his family freedom.
We're fairly certain that an abolitionist community of free black people who were actively getting their families out of Missouri and Kentucky to come and live here would not have been something that would be unknown to the abolitionist Underground Railroad network.
Everybody knew when you got to New Philadelphia, you had a pair of shoes and a horse and directions or a guide to get you to Canada, which, you know, it's a wonderful story. Frank made such a wonderful contribution to the whole notion of freedom.
It's very hard for archaeologists to find the actual material remains of the Underground Railroad because it's basically individuals escaping, staying in known structures that are used as a barn. It's not as if you create special spaces for it. But there's a tremendous oral history and then documentary history of the area that gives us every reason to believe that New Philadelphia was an active participant in the Underground Railroad.
After the American Civil War, there's also a migration from the South where we see a lot of African Americans moving into Illinois and Hadley Township and also into New Philadelphia. And that's probably the reason why the town's population peaked in 1865.
In 1869, the town's bypassed by the railroad and the population begins to decline. So that by 1885, we see in the court records that part of the town was declassified as a town and the land reverted for general agricultural use because people had moved away and now it was basically being pulled back into general farming use. We're exploring the reasons for the bypass of the town by the railroad, and we have not yet found any of the traditional reasons of topography made a reason to avoid the town. And it may be that that fits within we're going to find that that fits within the story of racial impacts, that there may have been some sort of racial bias of the actual route of the railroad, and that's an ongoing research question for us.
The early settlers dug a cellar hole, they built a cabin around it, and after the town was abandoned, they'd start filling it with trash. And the trash is what we're after. We're interested in other people's garbage because that gives us a clue about what people are buying, what they're consuming, their access to markets, their dietary habits.
The more households we can excavate, compare the data, compare the material culture, the building styles that we can infer of architecture, the richer picture we'll have of the history of the town.
We've been here about 4 weeks now. We found a lot of glass, just flat glass and ceramic. And then in the past couple of days we found a key, so that was a really cool find.
We just found a small cylindrical piece that could be a game piece or a doll over by where Jason and Hillary are working.
And we've also found there's, you can't see it anymore, but there used to be like some ash. And so one idea that we have is that it might have been like a fireplace. We've been finding a lot of burned bones and a lot of animal bones over in this area over here. And that's really where we found the majority of our artifacts.
And once the artifacts are washed and sorted out in the field, we bring them in here in drying trays to dry. And then we put them in artifact bags and take them to the museum where we'll catalog them. These are porcelain feet that we think they're from a doll. We found some other fragments. We haven't tried to fit them all together yet.
The last couple of days we'll be filling everything back in, which is kind of sad, but you know, we have to do it, be as non-destructive as possible. And then we're all moving to Springfield to the Illinois State Museum Research and Collections Department, where we will be analyzing all of the artifacts we've been pulling out and hopefully getting a clearer picture of what it is that happened here.
I love it. I think it's fascinating. It's part of history, and we can learn something new from them. Every little piece they take out, we can learn something.
It's good to see the community also so interested in a project like this. It just makes you feel that Free Frank actually did, not only did he inspire others around him, I'm sure, during his time, but for years to come, his story is still going to live on. And through us finding artifacts and researching and hopefully displaying some of them, people who may not have known about the story may learn and get something from it.
It's almost that this is a cross-section of America. You have just tons of people living here, and it's probably not racial utopia. People aren't probably terribly harmonious. There's conflict here, and days are tough, and breaking the sod is still as hard here in New Philadelphia as it is anywhere else. But this is a whole slice, a cross-section of America at large, taken down to about 40-some acres. And so understanding this little place helps us to build a broader picture of what America could be.
It's just such a great story, and you feel like you're really learning something about one of the untold American heroes.
He negotiated and purchased the freedom of himself, his wife, other kids. He came here and assisted the Underground Railroad, and he sent descendants to fight in the Civil War. So it seems to me, Frank and his family fought for freedom every way you could.
His gravesite, as a matter of fact, is one of 3 in the state. Is on the National Registry of Historic Places, Abraham Lincoln, and then Douglas, the senator that he debated, and the 3rd is Frank McWorter. So he's certainly a part of the memory in the state. I think he's in a good place. He's in a very good place.
He's just a phenomenal individual who should be in every history book that students are reading in our grade schools, in our primary schools. He should be there when you read about Abraham Lincoln. It's individuals like Free Frank who should be part of the story too.
Well, I think the main thing is we can learn is that America's possible. This country is possible. I think that's the message. America is possible. That's the message of Free Frank.